The goal of this panel is to give you some empathy, DevOps is all about empathy, and some awareness and understanding of what the business leaders in your organizations are facing, and honestly, how to kind of talk to them. So you heard Sanjay say in the keynotes, he mentioned the phrase with some derision, digital transformation. This is just jargon for that area of the business. We've got our own jargon in operations, in development, and to people outside it seems kind of either mysterious or reasonably meaningless. And so the goal of this conversation here that we're going to have is, how do you engage with your CIOs and CTOs? How do you understand what they want? And how do you present the things you want to get done in a way that they will understand so they can get them done? And with that, I would like to welcome Sanjay, Ronald, and Peter onto the stage. So I thought I would start with just asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves and talk about the kinds of CIO or CTO roles they've had in the past, just so you all get some idea about the context. Do you want to go first, Sanjay?
I have to introduce myself again?
Yeah.
OK, I'll do my whole keynote from yesterday.
Yeah.
No, so Sanjay Mirchandani, currently CEO at Puppet, but prior life I did shy of 5 years as CIO of EMC, and I'm here as an ex-CIO.
OK, Ronald Muijrers. CTO of KPN Business Operations. KPN, the telco in the Netherlands, the incumbent telco delivering a broad range of IT services, but also, let's say, the consumer services, so IPTV, mobile services. My former roles is that of lead architect, and took over the role last year of our former CTO.
Cool.
So.
Excellent.
So I'm Peter Richards, have spent over 25 years in financial services technology. I'm actually now retired, so as Jeff said in the first segment, the CTOs will move on and you will have to come and replace us. Well, I'm the first one who moved on, but I was CTO at Goldman, a little company called Bear Stearns, then for the markets business in JP Morgan and Bank of America. And had a lot to do with the engineering of the distributed systems.
Cool. Well, hopefully, coming on as a retired member of the panel, you'll be able to speak with a little more freedom.
Well, yeah, I can sort of observe from the sidelines.
So why don't we start with you, Peter? How do you see what the role of the CIO and or CTO has been over the last few decades, and how you see it sort of changing recently and sort of in the near future?
Yeah, they really have changed. About 4 or 5 weeks ago in the New York Times, there was the start of an article said all companies are now technology companies. And what that really means is that the CIO, the CTO, the senior members of the technology team are now part of the business development team. So they have to understand the business and they have to contribute to how businesses are evolving. It's no longer you tell me what we need to do and I'll get on with it. You really have to come up with the ideas. And I think that's a fantastic opportunity for senior technology people.
Cool. And you, Ronald?
I agree upon that. I think the world is changing rapidly. The CIO role has all to do with execution, enablement, and development. And I think the focus is shifting much more into development. Of course, the normal household has to be put together. So execution enablement must be available. But then again, the way the world is changing and the way we have to adapt is for sure that development is a key aspect of the new CIO.
Sanjay?
I'd say that for years there's been this debate about the CIOs have a voice at the table, at the executive table, the decision-making table, or are the decisions in the business made and then the CIOs get told what to go to execute. And I think there's never been a better time to be a CIO, because the successful companies of today, the ones that I shared yesterday of the Fortune 500, 52% of the companies in the last 15 years are new. And I think there's never been a better time for a CIO to embrace the bringing together of business priorities and wrapping it with technology. Because it's hard to find a leading edge company that doesn't wrap their product or service offering with a great sort of wrapper of technology around it. So great time to be a CIO.
It feels like there's all sorts of analogies there with the whole DevOps movement of actually sort of taking business goals and business values and working out how to execute on them with technology. So along those lines, I'll go back to Peter first. One of the things I've always wondered is how, when you're running these large organizations with large teams of large technical people, I think that many of us in the audience have been, far further down the food chain on, how do you actually create change when you've got a large technical organization underneath you?
Yeah, I'm still struggling with the idea that only large technical people are allowed to discuss it. But look, organizations have an inertia, right? So you have a large organization, it takes a while for things to change, right? And that's just a fact. You can help that by getting all of the organization to understand where you're going. So you set out the direction. But I think it's also a responsibility of everybody who's in the technology team to understand the business of the organization they're in. Right? If you don't understand the business and the business processes, then you can't bring your skill set to help with advancing the business. And so if everybody understands that, then they can see why we're doing things. And that helps with change. It helps with the adoption of both new technologies and, frankly, new business practices.
And what about you? You've got a huge team. There's a lot of really great Puppet users there.
Yeah.
KPN have been, I think, pretty much running Puppet user group in Amsterdam and doing a really great work there. How do you deal with sort of all those people and getting them to do stuff? And I know that sounds somewhat simple, but that's sort of the problem.
I think it's all about creating an area in which they can excel in the things that they would like to excel in best. And we have a keen team of ops guys and girls that actually came from ops and are going into the development area. That's the area in which we are paving the way into more infrastructure as a code services. That's also our, let's say, our Bible in which we make decisions, and our team is using that to create more dynamic services, more repetitive services based on code. And in the past, we didn't have a real community in KPN. KPN as an old telco incumbent 10 years ago. If somebody would ask you, where are you working from? You say, I'm a telco company, but not KPN. But now those guys are creating meetups, they are joining meetups, they're creating also an internal community, and they're really paving a way forward in which I think KPN can really be able to compete in a new business era.
That's awesome. Sanjay, EMC, not a small company. You took on a role there. I don't know how large your team was at its sort of
2,000
largest.
people.
2,000 people. How on earth do you even sort of wrangle like 2,000 people?
Well, I'm going to give you two sort of different ways that we approached it, and with different degrees of success. One was over-communicating, and we just couldn't do enough of that. When we were trying to drive change or work differently or add another global site or whatever the impact that we were trying to drive, it was actually in the goals of the senior team in IT to make sure that we had communicated that personally to everyone that we could within our individual it was part of what we did, and explicitly, and we used different approaches to doing that. That was one. Once we had sort of gotten the broad thing out, it was a bottoms-up movement where we wanted practitioners. We wanted folks who were passionate about the topic. They'd done best practices. They were willing to take a little chance on their career to try something different out of the box. And we had a groundswell that we would then try and generate that would also bring the rest of the organization with us. So it was a push-pull thing we did, and we got better with it over time. And over time, we had more people sort of saying, hey, I want to be part of that undefined thing that we're trying to do, or that new thing we're trying to do. A ton of respect for that.
Yeah. So one thing I often hear, so I actually sort of straw polled a whole bunch of attendees as I was going around the conference the last few days, saying, I've got this panel coming up. What questions would you ask, your CIOs and CTOs? And one thing that came up quite often was, I can never seem to get senior leadership to take seriously the idea of addressing technical debt. We've had to cut corners for time pressures, budget pressures over several years, sometimes a decade, for some of these large organizations. And I can never get anyone to take seriously the idea that we need to invest and actually address a whole bunch of these issues in order to move forward. I was wondering if any of you on the panel had sort of had experience working out or had suggestions for how people could construct their case for their management chain to actually take these concerns seriously.
So it's a tricky question, right? But there are a couple of things that I want to preface it with. The first is that as you get more senior, as you grow into the senior roles, you actually lose the ability to really direct and control. I know that seems kind of crazy, but if you have 2,000 people, you actually can't tell all of them what to do. So you have to lead by example. And you also are not specifically telling everybody what to do, so therefore the individuals can add pieces to their role, right? So in terms of dealing with technical debt, part of the reason that it's there is because we as a community have been a little bit lazy, right? We didn't always bring things with us when we started introducing new. You know, we assumed that the old would go away and the new would be fine. That actually doesn't happen. And what you have to do, and what everybody has a responsibility to do, is to ensure that they're including the old as they bring in new. And then suddenly, instead of it being, gee, we should get the senior managers to tell us that we should fix all this old stuff, it's already getting fixed. So the answer is don't leave it behind, right? If you really, really need to make a case, then you should look at the amount of budget that is spent on new and the amount of budget that's spent on maintenance, and go back a few years and see that that's growing, the maintenance thing,
Right.
and say, look, we really need to focus on getting that down, right? But frankly, I think it's our responsibility, or, well, given that I'm in my current state, your responsibility, right, to take the steps and make sure that you don't leave things behind.
I agree 100% on the mix. You know, average enterprise has about 75% of their budget, IT budget, on things that are pre-committed in some ways, keeping the lights on, and then about 25% on new things, not even innovation, new things. And the goal, you know, to Peter's point, is to make that mix happen differently, to move more of that 75 into the 25. So we did two things, because I wasn't an IT person and I didn't know how to make the right decisions around some of the things when I first came in. And in my mind, it had to be oversimplified so that people could snap to fit to that model. And in my case, it was, we built a critical technology roadmap that we were going on a multi-year journey. At that time, it was our private cloud, virtualization moving to private cloud, and it's later on we built mobile into that mix. And everything had to fit that architecture, that direction. And so the litmus test I used with my team when they wanted to come in with something new or buy some new technology or change and go some different ways, how does it fit that? If it doesn't fit that roadmap, you're going to have to do a lot to convince me that it's the right thing to do. So if the business wanted to bring in a physical, something that ran on physical architectures as opposed to virtual architectures, the answer was no. Our journey was to go 100% virtualized if we could. So if somebody said, I want this system, but it runs only physically on that, no. That was an easy one. And the other ones were a little more tricky. They were more gray. And, you know, then I would ask the deep question, you know, is this a must-have or a good-to-have? And that was sort of more of an honor system response than a roadmap response. And between those two things, you could probably get the right answers.
Yeah. I think, yeah, sometimes you need an event to create awareness. For us, an example was almost 5 years ago, we were hacked. Yeah. KPN was hacked by a 17-year-old kid.
Oof.
Yeah. So, is it better to be hacked by a 40-year-old guy? I don't know, but I think today, let's say,
it's cooler.
It's smart. No, they're open-minded, at least on a lower age. But then again, okay, it was exposed in the Dutch newspapers. So you can imagine the CXO of KPN, a medieval town, a block in the middle of the square, and hanging. Yeah, sorry, we did wrong. And that was the kind of feeling that we had. And yeah, what's the return on investment of security? It's a really difficult question.
Yeah.
At that time, it wasn't an issue anymore. So KPN got aware that such an event could really drastically affect the brand KPN, and also the way how people could rely on keeping a safe harbor for their data. And it opened a new era within KPN in which security is really part of our DNA now. So we've got a security team, we've got a group of 14 ethical hackers. They're also competing worldwide in the Cyber Olympics. They're doing really quite well. During the last years, they were at least on the top 3 and even on international level. And paving the way in creating a security awareness environment. And I think if you talk about infrastructure as code, security awareness is quite important. And that's also the way, the area where Puppet came in was very important for us, because we created a KPN security policy. That describes how our code of conduct. It's not about swearing or something. So I don't curse now. It's difficult for a Dutch guy on stage, but okay. So we have a security awareness, and Puppet is giving us almost real-time view of our security enablement on all those systems. And we were expanding that quite fast. We are learning from that. We are doing that in a brownfield environment. So that's quite complex, because that brownfield environment hosts critical business systems in the Netherlands, from the local government, from central government, but also from, for example, the Dutch railways or utility companies. So if those systems go down, it really affects the Dutch economy. And yeah, these kinds of events are helping us to create awareness, and also getting us able to eventually having guys like what I told, the community, the creation of community, to make that available within, let's say, a more old kind of company that's transforming. It could go faster, but transforming nicely, I think.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. So Holly, who runs customer success at Puppet, is often, if a disaster happens, she'll be like, no, Nigel, that's not a disaster. That's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And anyone at Puppet who's worked there has probably heard Holly say this many times. So, you can take these moments and, disasters, issues, and use them to create change. But it sort of sounds like, from summing up everything you were saying, that unlike the feeling many people, I think, have in the trenches, the people at the C-level technical information officers level, you're not micromanaging all the way down, because it's literally impossible at a certain scale. And so is it more about your over-communicating, about the guidance, and sort of,
it's about,
like, you're not really steering?
You have to set the vision.
Yep.
Right? One of the things which I think is very important is all of us in technology should think about 3 time frames all the time, right? So disasters, i.e. firefighting, right? It's a really good idea to put the fire out, right? You shouldn't be doing architectural thinking while there's a fire burning. You've got to fix that. You should also think about what you're delivering, right? So there's a sort of requirement to be continually delivering things. But the third thing, right? So the first one is instantaneous. The second one is, you tell me what your delivery time frame is. It used to be a year. It's now coming down to perhaps a couple of weeks. But the last one, which is often forgotten about, is the 3-4 year horizon. Where are we going? And that then allows people to sort of say, how can I help get us there? What are the things which allow you to do that? And I think it's the senior team have to really set that vision and then make sure that people understand it. What does it mean to them? And it's that's the way that you get everybody going down the same path. Because you're right, you can't micromanage everybody. If you do, I'm sure you guys would not be very happy if people told you every day what you had to do. Because, no one of us is actually smarter than all of us, right? So you need to bring that skill to bear on the problems. Because, certainly I guarantee none of us can actually tell you what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I think it's all about empowering teams and give them the opportunity to be creative and not steer in a more hierarchical way, not from hierarchy, but from mutual respect and willingness to listen. Don't think that you have the knowledge to make decisions. You have to learn from each other to be, I think, better. And for us, that's really keen upon in creating a way to go forward. By example, in the past we had roadmaps. Roadmaps that said, well, this year we going to do this, that year we're going to do that technology. Those features are coming, and those roadmaps are nowadays are a Scrum board, and that's giving us visibility and to control more dynamic in features that our customers are demanding, and really act upon those requests. Yeah.
Yep. So it sounds like, and again, I'm sort of thinking this through. I know one of the big changes for me was, I was tech leading teams, and then I started managing teams, and then I found managing managers was just a completely, radically different job to anything else I'd ever done. There's this odd action and distance to it. So it almost sounds like, I guess, summing up what you're all saying, that if individuals in the trenches are feeling like they don't have room to address something like technical debt, thinking about it as how would I write a case to the CIO, really there's a management problem in the management chain between them and the CIO. And the CIO, a good CIO, shouldn't really want a situation where all of the management chain are like micromanaging everyone all the way down.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
So moving away from that sort of trying to bring a case to your C-level execs, Jeffrey mentioned, the virtue of being at the right place at the right time, picking the right technology wave that transforms your company and becoming a very senior individual practitioner. I was wondering if any of you had stories from your own careers where people had done something like that, and like how you found out about it, what kind of transformations they actually created.
I could take a stab
Yep.
at it. And some of this sounds a bit dated because I was a CIO. I have been a CIO for 3 years. But there was a point where the advent of mobile apps inside the enterprise was becoming so loud, the need for mobile applications to run the enterprise, as opposed to connecting with customers, where employees wanted everything they did when they were on the network to be available when they were off the network. And we realized very quickly that that was a completely different skill set, because IT was traditionally very proficient in writing applications that filled a 27-inch monitor. But when you had to downsize that to a 2x4-inch screen, we looked kind of stupid. And so,
I still use apps like that all the time.
and so you almost had to reinvent how you thought about it. And we had a fresh batch of, I remember at the time, college grads that came in who grew up on those devices. And essentially, one of them said to me, we got a bunch of folks writing apps for a generation that's not going to use them the way you wrote them. Let us write them. And they went off and reskinned those apps the way they should be written on mobile. And that was something that just happened organically, where we changed the system, we changed the way we approached it. Now, we did give them IT disciplines with more seasoned IT professionals who they worked with, but it was a cross-pollination, if you would, that really made it mainstream as opposed to being something else that we did or we didn't accept or we had to go think about. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, it does. Does anyone else have stories about, practitioners doing things that emerged or caught your attention?
I'd actually rather reinforce what Jeffrey said.
You can answer whatever question you would like.
Yeah, I thought I'd do that, actually. I've been watching the debates on TV, and I realize that you shouldn't ever pay attention to what question you're asked.
Don't fall prey to the question. Right? Don't answer his question.
I believe we did get a whole lot of free publicity around Puppet on Twitter.
Fact check him.
Exactly. But in all seriousness, right, the migration to the cloud, which was talked about a little this morning, is one of what I believe to be the big pivot moments in our lifetime. I think there were two others, certainly in my time in technology. One was the introduction of the PC, which was a long time ago, but that made a huge difference. And then the second one was the adoption of the internet by business, which again changed the way people think. And so you actually, rather than individuals doing something which catches the eye, it's more, how do you actually make sure that you're with where technology is taking you? And if you think about it, a lot of what we have been doing for the last 10 to 15 years is really playing with the infrastructure component, because that's where the boxes were, and that's, physical devices need a lot of work. And we weren't really paying attention to the application. Now that the cloud is sort of playing in this space, and all you have to do is make an API call, and now you can focus on the application, which means that you can think about the business. And so to me, the answer is the people who are going to be thinking about how to bring their skills to change business are going to be the ones that catch the eye, right? So it really is. And just to finish it off with the story, the guy who actually first brought an internet application for clients to Goldman became one of the first technical fellows, partner, et cetera, and is now happily retired. But it was, he was ahead of the curve, right? And we put this thing out there, all sorts of people used it, and there was a huge mass of people saying, oh, you can't do that, you let them in, right? But now everybody does it. And so if you watch what's happening and then take that, I think that's how you become successful. This is just huge. It really is.
Someone made I actually brought this up in a panel recently that clearly all of you couldn't have fit into the tiny room, but I got some really great advice for hiring a couple of years ago from someone where they were saying, it doesn't really matter what skills someone has on their resume, it's when they adopted them.
Yeah.
So go and look at them. If, like someone today saying, I've done a cloud automation distributed application, like that's worthy and that's valid, but someone doing that now versus 6 years ago, they're radically different in terms of their ability to perceive and adapt to change.
Yeah. We, at this time, encouraging our guys and girls to adopt the new technology, and also to bring that into the community, to be proactive there. And coming back to your last question, what I found compelling within our company is that most telcos rely on enterprise-like applications, telco-grade-like applications. And what we saw during the last year, and also with the development we did around Puppet, is that we adopted open source-like software and implement that in a telco-grade environment, and that created new discussions, because telco services are under, let's say, strict budget control. Some of the things we still earn some money is intellectual property. We have even an intellectual property office which deals with patents. So you could imagine when we raised the question, well, we're creating open source, and we're adapting open source, and we want to give that back to the community. Yeah, okay, how could you make that profitable? Now, we don't make that profitable. It's our contribution to the open community. So it's yeah, a different way of thinking.
That is a different way of thinking. So that actually brings up an interesting point in the last few minutes we have here. Open source has been a huge sort of driver and change within the enterprise. Is that something usually within the CIO and CTO's control? Because often the intellectual property office might live somewhere else and report to a CFO or a different area of the company. Is that something they can usually just decide in a large company and start pushing through their org? Or are you facing resistance from your peers at an executive level?
So in reference to an earlier answer, when you're a CIO or CTO, you don't really control much. What you have to do is you put guidelines and guardrails around, right? And you have to, as you did, really understand the benefits and the value that comes from adopting open source and the dangers, right? So you actually have to provide the safe area for people to work in. And frankly, I think the open standards, open source, and the various open projects that are around have been a fantastically enabling thing for enterprises, because you avoid an awful lot of the lock-in, which has been the bane of many enterprises' lives. And so, even, it's fantastic to hear Microsoft has now sort of jumped on the bandwagon, which is a tremendous thing for enterprise. So it's great to encourage that. And what you have to do is you put the safety in. You don't want people doing it in the background, only to discover that they've done it, which is great, but they did it in a way which compromises the security. Right? You don't want that. So you have to be very supportive of the changes and encourage that.
I think it's come a long way in the last 5, 7 years. Back then it was, you didn't know what you were dealing with potentially, but then when Linux got embraced into the enterprise, that legitimized everything around it, and it just became a way in which you could think about it. There was a model, you could work with it, you put guidelines around it, and then you made sure folks, stayed within the parameters.
Yep.
And definitely encourage it if it gets you to value quicker, and there's a better way to do something. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really also creating awareness that by example, the way as a company you're adopting open source, and in fact, I think the adoption of open source is going, the amount of features that are coming in are really excelling the most commercial products nowadays. So you have to really check into the balance from which kind of adoption could bring you in the new way forward. And that for us is also bringing that information, bringing that aspect back to our product managers and our corporate team to really let them be aware that this is also the aspect of how KPN as a brand, as a telco, is moving forward. And that for us is important because we would like to adopt new guys and girls, let's say the 70-year-old guy that hacked us, to really come to work for KPN. And that would be great.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing I've really noticed is that I think we've seen a rise in sort of faux open source projects where it's like, we're just going to throw it up on GitHub and then issue a whole bunch of press releases, but not actually commit to maintaining and supporting. And I think one of the things companies really need to make sure they understand is what kind of open source are they doing? Are they trying to nurture a community? Are they just going to make it very clear in the READMEs, this thing's out there, use it at your own peril? If you want to fix bugs, but no one's going to answer this. Because I think it often puts the people who wrote it internally into a very difficult position because they still have a day job.
Yep.
Well, I think the other thing which enterprises are still struggling with is when they're using some open source, how do they actually ensure that they're contributing back? Not just the code, but enterprises, I think, should really think about how can they support the movement. And not everybody's quite got that yet.
Because it definitely hurts their image. Many companies love open source like sharks love fish. They're not giving that back. So with that, I think we're actually out of time, and I totally didn't mean to end on that note. Thank you, everyone on our panel.
Nice socks.